Good morning. Thank you all so very much for joining us. And Mary was just saying that in the summer, lots of people are away and other people aren't away, are having to double up. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and join us here this morning. So let's start right here. These are a couple of the hats that I wear. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm with the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, but I'm based at the MaRS Discovery District. Everybody's been to MaRS, right? Yeah. Anybody not? I'm gonna out you right now. Anybody not been to MaRS? No. Well, I really do hope you take advantage of it. Just mostly because it's like right across the street, and there's a Starbucks if nothing else, right? But there's lots of cool things going on there. So as part of my fellowship with the McConnell Foundation, I work quite extensively with post-secondary institutions to get them to understand and embrace social innovation, social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, social finance. It's a whole series of terms that we'll talk a little bit about. So I'm the social entrepreneur in residence at the University of Waterloo, and on the Dean's Council for Ryerson right here. Of course, do lots of work with U of T as well, simply because they too are across the street. Anybody ever heard of 211? Okay, so this is my mission, to get out the word about 211. So 211 was actually my social innovation, and so I worked at a place called Community Information Toronto, and we were having people have a really tough time knowing what level of government provides what service. So 311 is municipal, but people call them because they need their driver's license renewed. Or people call 911 because they think someone in their family is having trouble with alcoholism. And they don't know where to start. So 211 is the number that you can call, starting in Toronto, now available across North America, if you don't know what level of service you need from what level of government. And so you are, for example, looking for a nursing home for your mom, and you don't know about CCACs, and you don't know where to start. And in fact, maybe all you need is a break. Maybe you need some respite care, but you don't even know respite care exists. And so 211 is the number that you can call, available 24/7, multilingual, and again, it started right here in Toronto. So I'm hoping that you will use 211. You can even use it if you want to make a donation, right? You have a car, you want to donate it and have kids work on that, and you don't know what social services are available. So it's really terrific. And the reason I'm pushing it is it took me 10 years to get through the CRTC, and so I'm really hoping that now that it's done that we can take advantage of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about MaRS, a little bit about what we mean by social innovation, and then some of the big trends that we're seeing in things like social entrepreneurship, social finance, and social labs. So different use of the word lab than you may be used to. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the resources throughout and hopefully give us all a sense of agency, because we certainly live in a time when it's easy to feel immobilized by all the challenges that we face. So let's just try to think about what can we actually do to begin to make a difference and talk about that. Also, before I begin, I want to say, like many people in the world, my life has been deeply touched by cancer. I lost a child to cancer, hepatoblastoma, when she was 4. My mother-in-law died within a year of lung cancer. This was about 15 years ago. But more recently, on the good news side, both my mother, who had lung cancer, and my husband, who had throat cancer, are survivors. So I want to thank you deeply and personally for your work, and it's a real honor and privilege to be here with you today. Life on MaRS. 1.5 million square feet, that is now full, thankfully, of some pretty amazing organizations. At MaRS, we try to think about how do we position Canada as a leader in the innovation economy? What are the talent needs? So we have free entrepreneurship education. Who are the ventures that are best positioned through high impact and high growth to take us to the next level of impact? Information communication technology, clean tech, and of course, life sciences, healthcare. Terrific to support individual talent, wonderful to support individual ventures, but at some point, you have to put a systems lens on this. So for example, if we have a terrific clean tech entrepreneur who's doing wonderful stuff in the world of solar, but the regulators are keeping him out, or the utilities have no space for that, or we don't think that climate change is an issue, we're never going to get the kind of uptake that we need. So at the systems level at MaRS, we have things like an advanced energy center. And within the advanced energy center, they work with utilities on gamification to get them to think like a system. So one of the opportunities I had was to attend a bunch of utilities playing a game on how things are all connected. And they did a really good job of figuring out how to get power to businesses, and they forgot all about the food system. Oops, right? It's because people just tend to look down. We look down and we do our work. We don't take the opportunity to look up and see how things are connected, apropos the theme of this lecture series. So it's a really interesting chunk of work. Also in the systems pillar, we have the Center for Impact Investing. How do we finance, how do we fund social purpose work differently? I'll spend a little bit of time on that. We have something called Data Catalyst, which is our open data project. And data is a huge theme that's happening, that we have to figure out how do we use data differently to make a social impact. We have something called Excite, which many of you may know about. It's probably the most relevant. It links early stage entrepreneurs in the healthcare system with purchasers, such as hospitals, to get them much closer together in the system so there's a ready purchaser. So if we have an entrepreneur going down to the US trying to sell their product or service, and they ask them if they have an Ontario consumer, they say, oh, well, no, we don't. Well, hopefully now we will, and hopefully that'll accelerate the adoption of that innovation. So lots of cool stuff happening there. And social innovation is a cross-cutting theme. It's not a specific area for it. It goes across everything that we do so that we can help ventures think about how they can make money and not destroy the environment at the same time. Or is there a market opportunity they hadn't been thinking about because they didn't put this lens on their work? And as I mentioned, it all sits on about 1.5 million square feet. Our theory of change is that we can have a mainstream integration of this stuff. So we held a Canadian task force on social finance in 2010, and we tried to figure out how do we mobilize private capital for public good. Almost right away, RBC announced an impact investing fund. That is what we want. We don't want these small little funds off to the side. We want the big players thinking about how they can play in this space. Impact investors are generally people who want to invest for a financial and a social or economic return. So if you think about it this way, I reach into my pocket, I make a donation to Princess Margaret. I reach into my other pocket and I invest for profit maximization. But in the middle, is there an opportunity for me to invest for social and or financial return? That's the impact investing space, and it's growing, particularly among next-gen investors. We'll spend a little bit more time on that, but our job is really to get folks like Ernst & Young to not only have an Entrepreneur of the Year, but a Social Entrepreneur of the Year. And this blended value approach has been picked up by the European Commission, and I've had a chance to go there on several occasions. So I think we can do hard things, just think we have to really get started and work at it. The thing about the social innovation space is it's exploding. So I started at MaRS in 2007, and so what's going to happen over the next 4 to 5 minutes or so is you're going to be drinking from the fire hose. Because I have a lot of stuff that I'd like to tell you, and I'm hoping that this is just the beginning of a conversation. And if there's any area that you're particularly interested in, Rebecca will have the slides, and please feel free to consult them, or I'll have my contact information. I'd love to continue this discussion with you. So first off, what a messy, messy ecosystem of terms. Welcome to an emergent field where no definitions are clear and no one knows exactly what anybody else is talking about. But within that space, I spent a lot of time struggling with the definitions. And so now I'm like, okay, here's what I understand social innovation to be. Yours may be slightly differently, but let's just go with it. Otherwise, we get completely immobilized and it becomes an academic exercise. So I will let academics have that debate. Actually, it matters to them and it matters to policymakers. It does not matter to practitioners, right? So for those of us that are driven to action, let's just get going. I can't go down there, right? Because y'all will lose the mic. Okay, I'll go do it anyway, but I'll come back to the mic, so bear with me. Turn the mic around. Thank you. Okay, old world. Hello, I'm a very traditional charity. I do very good work. I want you to write me a check and go away. Now I have to go down here. We take this world. So in that space, very traditional for-profit, I actually don't care that much about the environment. I'm all about profit maximization, and my employees are a means to an end. Right? Old world. That's not exactly how the world works anymore. Right? But that's how many of us were brought up. We had to make a choice. So I'm trained as a lawyer. I was working in the Rape Crisis Center movement. I'm very old, so that's when they were changing the law from rape to sexual assault. I volunteered at a Rape Crisis Center, knew that I could change women's lives immediately on the ground, and never practiced law. But I had to make a choice. You could go here and you can make money, or you can go here and not make money but feel good at the end of the day. So the folks I'm seeing now, particularly younger folks, are like, okay, completely reject your bifurcation. In fact, I'm very interested in the messy middle, and I want corporate structures that will support that. So these guys, charities, are saying we have to be more creative. We have to think about how we diversify income. It's not good enough to rely exclusively on the grant economy, because governments change and policies change and priorities change, and I am left without anything. The immigrant settlement sector in this city is really suffering from that. We received all the immigrants and settlement services, and therefore we're funded accordingly. And then they get a call, hi, we've noticed immigrants are moving out west, too bad, your funding's getting cut in half. Right? No resiliency in that sector. They were completely dependent on grants. So how do we think about what is the intellectual property those places may have? What can they do to generate income and diversify income aside from traditional fundraising approaches? On the other side, it's a little bit hard for me to buy your product and service if you're destroying the environment. So people are thinking very differently. Consumers, it's consumer-led, consumer demand. And also what we're seeing is this young talent, these MBAs saying, I'm not sure I want to work for a company if you don't have a really clear corporate social responsibility agenda. So there's both a talent imperative and a consumer imperative to think and do things differently, aside from the fact that, oh, I don't know, it's the right thing to do. Right? So we see pressure being put on both ends of the spectrum to think about both your social and your financial impact. And the messy middle is where I get to play. And that's where the most fun is. In the UK, they have something called a KIC, a community interest company that actually recognizes this blended value space. And British Columbia was the first province with that legislation. 2 weeks ago, Nova Scotia introduced similar legislation. Ontario, I hope you're listening, because we're falling far behind. And these guys are using all the research that we've done in order to move on this. So it's being demanded.
What's the legislation?
It's called a KIC, Community Interest Company, and it actually has things like an asset lock on it, and you have to change your articles of incorporation to include both social or environmental impact and how you will measure that social or environmental impact, so that it's not just I say I do good stuff for the environment, but I really don't. It's not like greenwashing. So it's an actual new incorporation structure that's neither a nonprofit or a traditional charity. Neither a nonprofit or a traditional business. Yeah, big trend. I'm also going to talk about B Corps. And actually, thank you very much for asking the question. If you have any questions, by all means, just shout it out. Okay? Thanks. We good? You get my messy view of the world? Does it work for you?
So can I just also ask Allyson, in terms of, so you've got the social entrepreneurs, or you call them, in the middle. In terms of the total global activities, it's still very much dominated by the traditional businesses, right?
I would say yes, but if you look at leaders like Unilever, which are huge companies, they're completely moving beyond writing a check to a charity, which is what they did, or CSR, sort of aligning some stuff, sponsoring a run, for example, moving along, to actually embedding things. I'll give you an example. Coke, kind of a big corporation, their issue is water. Like, how are they going to make Coke without clean water? And so instead of just thinking about they'd write a check to a charity, they're actually going into communities and figuring out how they create clean water, co-creating with communities on the ground that has a business impact. It's like enlightened self-interest for them. So the more advanced ones are moving at a much quicker space than the others. Of course, we're always going to have the profit maximizers, and we're always going to have the charities. But as a trend, there's much more movement to the middle. Yeah? Yes?
So just a question about these kits, these community interest companies.
Yeah.
Are those meant to be like local communities, or can they be global communities of like-minded people, as opposed to some sort of cause or something that they want to do?
So the KIC is actual corporate structure. So like for the I have a lot of people who have an idea for a venture. They say, how should I incorporate? Should I be a traditional for-profit, or should I be a charity or a nonprofit? How should I incorporate? And in BC, I can now say to them, you might want to be a KIC, because they're thinking about this blended value approach. So it's an actual corporate structure.
The activities that you don't have to confine within BC, they could be activities that would be all over the world, for instance, or could they?
They could, but their incorporation is just whatever in that particular province. So we have, Ontario corporations, or we have national corporations, right? So we don't have any national corporation legislation in this space for now. But I will talk to you about something else called B Corps in just a second, which is a move to that direction. And it's creating a very interesting community of like-minded people. Okay? Rebecca, can I get some water with that? Does anybody know what this is? Brickworks, right. Anybody went to the Brickworks? Yeah, so great. Like they have an amazing farmer's market if you're into farmer's market. Also, if you have a kid in summer camp and they're all about the environment, they have amazing camps there. They have a ton of social enterprises and in fact generate tens of millions of dollars from their social enterprises. This doesn't have to be a small endeavor. It can be pretty significant. Jeff Cape, who was our very first social entrepreneur of the year in 2007, started off planting trees in playgrounds. He wanted to green school playgrounds. And because he was around and keen and making progress, when this brickwork site became available, it's like Pottery Road, that kind of area, it's really very cool. He was able to secure that. A nonprofit was able to secure that in working with the city, and they completely regenerated that entire area. So I do encourage you to get there. So this is a non-profit social enterprise with a very significant mission around environmental education. You can also have a wedding there, if you want, just in case. Anybody looking for a wedding. So. Habitat for Humanity, right? So this is a pretty amazing nonprofit organization that helps people have home ownership by sweat equity. So of course people contribute to building the homes, and lots of people volunteer. And what they figured out was they got a lot of donations of materials they couldn't necessarily use, so they set up a store called Restore. And if you're renovating your kitchen and your cabinets are not good enough for you, but maybe good enough for me, I can go to Restore and buy them. Or you're looking for that very special handle you can't find at Home Hardware or Home Depot, head over to the Restore. Again, a very significant nonprofit social enterprise. And then the other side, corporates, just like we were talking about, people like Michael Porter are writing in the Harvard Business Review about things that he calls reinventing capitalism, creating shared value. So traditionally when we think in this space, we think, okay, fair trade. Fair trade is the way to go. And fair trade takes the existing pie and says, let's divide it up differently. So for example, coffee farmers will get more of the pie. Creating shared value says, forget that. Let's think about how we grow the pie. So let's take a corporation and their wonderful knowledge of irrigation methodologies and their helicopters and other devices that they have at their disposal, including the intelligence of their staff. And let's see how we look at what's happening in this space differently so we can actually grow the pie and figure out how we can all benefit from that. So it's not just people like me who are coming more from that left side who are thinking about this space. It's absolutely the businesses coming from the right and leaders like Michael Porter taking this space. Thank you so much. It's a huge movement in this space, and if you're interested at all, I encourage you to look up just creating shared value. Has anybody heard of Lucky Ironfish? Yeah? Terrific. Thank you so much. So this is coming from the far side of the right, moving, because they're money first, but they're really moving to that messy middle. If I was to tell you this story 5 years ago, for sure he would have been nonprofit, but today he's not, he's a for-profit. Gavin Armstrong, chemist out of the University of Guelph, doing some work in international development, goes to Cambodia, figures out that anemia is a huge problem in Cambodia. Oh look, there's these chunks of iron that are available here. Why don't I study whether or not people can use it in their cooking? Oh, hello, ma'am, would you please put this chunk of iron into your cooking water? Yeah, okay, crazy kid from Guelph? I don't think so, right? Not at all, not happening. Okay, determined. So he figures out that the fish is a symbol of luck, and he spends a lot of time working with people figuring out how could we take advantage of that. So using the local artisans, they shape the iron into a fish. And now, you're more likely to put that in your cooking water. And in fact, that's what's happening, and it's happening at an amazing rate. And they're seeing incredible response from this kind of approach. So when you're thinking about, all the incredible knowledge and experience that you have, we tend to go right to the high tech. We tend to think about the complicated things. Lucky Ironfish, an amazingly simple solution to a challenging situation. And I do hope that you'll keep in mind that these are some ways that we can go. Now, Gavin decided to certify as a B corporation. What that means is he has completed kind of like an ISO set of standards that says he scores at least 80 out of 200 on how he treats his employees, what's happening along the supply chain, that he actually has changed his articles of incorporation to include having social impact in addition to profit motivation. In the US, you can incorporate as a benefit corporation. In Canada, you could only complete the standards and get kind of like, about to date myself here, the good housekeeping seal of approval, right? So you can get an actual seal. And those impact investors that I talked about are looking for proof that you're not just saying you have a social impact. They want something like a B Corp certification so that you can actually be a legitimate recipient of their impact investing fund. Did you want to say anything else about Lucky Ironfish?
No, I've heard about it.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go. You can buy, like they have a kind of, one of the things they've adopted is the Tom Shoes model. Buy one, they give one to someone in need. But it's like $5. They've tried to make it pretty affordable for people who need it. So I have a kid in university, I'm giving them one of these because for sure he's like, how much iron you get from craft dinner? I don't know. So you think about that kind of thing as well. They also work with local artisans to make these little baskets that they are delivered in. So there's some really good use to it. He's clearly in that messy middle kind of space, right? Okay. This is another really interesting program. Okay, so a question, who has in their wallet a rewards card? Air Miles, Aeroplan, Indigo, blah, blah, blah. Does anybody not? Really? It's always interesting to me, there's a few people that don't have rewards miles. But apparently that's very un-Canadian of you because Canadians are the biggest users of reward miles globally. Somehow or other, we love our rewards miles. You go into the LCBO, you got 2 bottles of wine, similar, this one has air miles, this one doesn't, you're buying the one with the air miles. This guy's name is Andreas Surelates. Andreas says, okay, I love this whole concept, I'm going to try to use air miles for social change. And he sets up a whole program called Just That, and motivates positive behavior through the use of air miles. He's done with that, sells it off, and he sets up something called Carrot Rewards. And the company's called Social Change Rewards. They've launched it in BC with a 90-day start, and they're going to do it out west, and eventually it's going to make its way here. But you can earn rewards from all your favorite programs. Notice Air Miles is not here because that's the one he can't touch. But Scene, apparently, Scene, you can go to Cineplex, it's hugely popular. And people, so I, for example, get the app, download the app, I get some points. I try to get Rebecca interested. She signed up as well, I get more points. They use nudge theory. So maybe I sign up for a fitness club or a fitness class. I don't even have to take it, it's just the intention. It's just the moving, these small actions of moving towards it. So the Public Health Agency of Canada and the BC government bought a bunch of these air miles. The pickup rate was 80%. They completely bankrupted the program in the first 30 days. Because we love rewards miles. Seriously, who knew? But thinking about it as a way to incentivize behavior, it's a really interesting kind of approach. And of course, there's an app for everything. Why not an app to motivate us towards something that's actually positive? So again, something clearly in the middle, right? So they're out there to make money. They know how to make money. They sell these air miles points, but they will only do it if it actually incentivizes positive behavior. And the reason that they're able to stay true is they have 3 charity partners, one of which is Heart and Stroke. So you can see there's an example where someone said, let's incentivize people, it's really hard to get them to do fruits and vegetables. Let's say, what if they just drink more juice? And Heart and Stroke said, with the sugar content, that's actually not what we want. That's not what we want to incentivize. So we're going to reject that. So even though we had a real opportunity there, he said, okay, we're going to stay true to what we said we're going to do and motivate only the right kind of behavior. Healthy, active living kind of stuff. Right? Partnerships, connections. Questions? It's cool, right? So on the bigger front, there are people like Bill Drayton, who's the founder of an organization called Ashoka. Ashoka is a global movement of social entrepreneurs and change makers. Canada's got a pretty robust and growing program in this space. Systems thinking. Social entrepreneurs are not content just to give a fish, sorry, there's a typo, or even teach how to fish. They will not rest until they've revolutionized the fishing industry, right? So lots of times the kind of work that I'm doing is focused very much on an individual venture or the traditional charity model, let me give you a fish. It's like, you know what, let's sit back, let's find those connections, let's map the ecosystems, let's leverage actions. That's what social entrepreneurs really do, thinking at this level. David Bornstein is a Canadian, wrote a book called How to Change the World. That's a great book, right? What are you doing? I'm writing a book on how to change the world. That's true. He sees social entrepreneurs this way. They identify resources where people see problems. They view the villagers as the solutions, not the passive beneficiary. They begin with the assumption of competence and unleash resources in the communities they're serving. Two things, when I studied social work, we were told, you're the smart one, you're the one with the education, you're going to go in and fix that community. Yeah, it didn't work all that well, right? We're now told in healthcare, put patients at the center. We're told that we've got to customize it, we've got to be much more patient-centric. This is that kind of approach that helps us think differently about how we're going to make a real impact. Despite all our training, all our education, it's got to be centered on the user. It's got to be centered on the patient. In order to deal with that, we've set up something called the MaRS Solutions Lab. So part of the gig that I have that I like a lot is I get to travel and I get to scan and see what kind of things are happening around the world. There was a whole series of change labs led by a group called Rios, interestingly enough, also started by a Canadian, mostly based in South Africa now. We're trying to think about how do we tackle complex challenges using multi-pronged approach. This is our periodic table of systems change. Slightly different periodic table from what you're used to. But if you think about it this way, and I'm just going to say this very briefly because I don't have so much time, but one way to change a system is to think about market opportunities, right? If you're holding an iPhone, you can get the value of a market intervention. So how do we think about, the whole process from hypothesis through research, ideation, testing, and eventually to market? I'm going to bring you down to policy, the third row, because we understand that policy is a huge lever of systems change. How do you frame the problem? Get agreement around what, in fact, that problem is. Get buy-in on the vision. Make sure you've got the right kind of evidence, and eventually getting to policy change. You have to build the capacity of people to actually implement that change. So this is the whole diffusion of innovation cycle. And then ultimately, we have to get solutions to go to scale. We use a process of shared understanding, co-creation, rapid prototyping, because as you know, we live in the land of pilot projects that die. And so we've changed the language to prototyping and rapid prototyping and iteration before we begin to put anything to scale, because it's too big an investment to try. So it's that kind of approach. And we believe that by pulling all of these kind of levers, we're going to be able to get to that social entrepreneur system-changing level that Bill Drayton talked about. You cannot do just one of those things. You have to do all of them. If you want a new culture, you've got to think about what are the policy levers, are there market opportunities, how are people going to do things differently, how is the behavior going to change, okay? Systems change in a 30-second slide, I know, but it gives you a sense of how we're thinking about these things. Any questions? An example is food banks. We absolutely have to feed the hungry person in front of us. We have no choice. So what are the immediate needs that you are facing and dealing with? But those of us who work in this space at all know that we've got to do better, that we've got to think about food from a systems point of view. We've got to think about our relationship with food, food sustainability. We have to think about all of that. It is not enough to simply have food banks. Although it is necessary, it is simply not sufficient to deal with our challenges. So it is working on both sides. That's something I think you also probably really keep in mind in your day-to-day work. There's a huge trend of what they're calling collective impact. So the Stanford Social Innovation Review is the kind of big guru or magazine that we, journal, that we read. And there's 5 main components. Number 1 is you want to have a common agenda. So this is about multi-sectoral engagement, but you have to get these diverse folks to agree on what it is that is their shared goal. What are the measurements? And again, in this space, measurements are a killer, right? Everybody just gets stuck at how do you show we're actually making an impact? And instead of thinking of 50 metrics, pick 5. Pick 5 metrics that people can agree on. What are your mutually reinforcing activities? So I can do a ton of other stuff, but what am I doing collaboratively with you that's going to advance that agenda? What's our communication platform? How are we going to know what each of us is doing, and how are we going to know when each of us deviates from that? And finally, what they call a backbone organization, which is the person who's managing it. Used to be the old secretariat function, who gets the money, who manages the stuff, and who does all of that. And groups like the Ontario Trillium Foundation have absolutely adopted this process for their work, recognizing that no one single organization is going to tackle these complex challenges. It has to be a collective impact approach. So lots of literature and communities of learning, communities of practice emerging in this space based around what we've actually done a lot of but never had the clear language. Right? So in this space, oftentimes just making the language accessible is part of the secret. So David Pico, who many of you may know, started groups like Luminato and Triac and Civic Action, was a real leader in this space here in Toronto. And that's Jeff Cape, who was, I mentioned, was the first social entrepreneur of the year, that conference that was held at MaRS. But we had the province there, we had federal government, we had business, and we had a leader from the Schwab Foundation, which is the World Economic Forum, to kick this off. So it really does require different people coming together to think differently about the problems before we even begin to get to solutions. But multi-sectoral engagement is hard. People often use exactly the same words and mean really different things. So for anybody in the audience who's really sort of, maybe they've got a kid my age and they're thinking about how do you help them figure out what kind of jobs they're going to have, get them to work in different sectors. Get them to spend a little bit of time in government if they can, or private sector, or NGOs, academia, because they will learn to speak the different languages and they'll be much more effective at bridging those gaps, which I think is the only way we're going to get through this stuff. Right? Enough with the silos. And of course, we talked about enabling policy legislation. This was a meeting of several ministers, and I had about 30 days to pull together a really quick conference for them before an election was called. Kill me now. I mean, it was because these guys do not talk to each other. You think they'll sit around the table together, but they don't bring their ministries with them. It is incredibly, incredibly challenging. So when you think about multi-sectoral engagement, if we can't even get those that are in the same area to speak to each other, then there's some real challenges here. But you've got to work at multiple levels before we get to the real kind of change that we need. And this guy on the right, you probably know the guy on the left, but the guy on the right is a guy called Sir Ronald Cohen, father of venture capital in the UK, and now also the father of social finance or impact investing. In 2010, based on a model 5 years earlier in the US, in the UK, we set up something called the Canadian Task Force on Social Finance. We were able to get people like Paul Martin to come and sit on this task force. And even though he was just a member, many people refer to it as the Martin Task Force on Social Finance, because he's a real leader in this space. And we tried to figure out exactly how do we mobilize private capital for public good. And we came up with a series of recommendations that you can read in these reports. The first one out, and then the second one a year later, monitoring progress. So I'll give you just one example. We have quite a lot of foundations in this company. You have a pretty impressive foundation here. They're required by law to give out 3.5% annually in grants. 65.5% can go to traditional investments. So they have the granting committees, and then they have the investment committees. The investment committees want to make a lot of money for the foundation so they can continue to do good work. What we said in the task force is, can you unlock some of that money that you're using for traditional investments to go to impact investing? Because let's face it, you have a mission as a foundation, and it's not just to make money. So the granting people got it, and the investment committee people really had to be convinced. They thought they were doing their due diligence. But we had a recommendation that 10% of that endowment should be unlocked for impact investing. So just down the street from us, across from Sick Kids, is the YWCA housing project. Probably all seen it, 300 units of affordable housing for women. They did amazing fundraising. They did the best they could. They were about $2 million short right at the end, and it was incredibly challenging for them. They came to us and we found a foundation, interestingly the McConnell Foundation out of Edmonton, who took out a $2 million bond, and they said, we will invest, we'll give you this $2 million as patient capital, 4% over 10 years. Pay us back when you're ready. And that $2 million got the YWCA over the finish line. They actually saved a fortune in construction costs, and they were able to finalize things, not a grant. They had a lot of grants, they dealt with grants, and of course our mindset is often grants in this space. They were able to think differently about how to use money. You know, they'd gone all the traditional routes, lines of credit, etc. This $2 million made the critical difference for them. So how do we get foundations to think differently about how to unlock their assets?
So in that example, how's that different than just getting a loan?
They were tapped out. And here's, you're gonna love this line. Here's what banks say. We're really not comfortable giving loans to places like the YWCA because if we have to foreclose, it's really hard to foreclose on God. Right? They're really reluctant because they can't be the bad guy if they have to pull something like that. And so unlocking traditional assets for those guys is incredibly challenging. And also, Mootard, because they were mission aligned, were co-creating with them. They were in it with them. It was completely an engaged financial investment, as opposed to just writing a check and going away. Yeah. It's a very interesting space. The other thing, so this is our Center for Impact Investing. These are the kind of things that are going on there. I want to talk to you for 1 second about social impact bonds. Anybody familiar with social impact bonds? A little bit? Yeah? Okay. So one of the things that's happening in this space, and it's basically outcomes-based financing. Started in the UK. There's a lot of this stuff happening from the UK, right? There's tons of, so Peterborough Prison had a recidivism rate of approximately 80% for young offenders. Okay. Go to prison, you get out, there's nobody there to greet you, you don't have a job, your family's disowned you. What are you going to do? Reoffend. You're back into the system in no time at all. So they went to the government and said, we've got some ideas for best practice initiatives based on evidence, et cetera, and we think we can get that rate down. And the government's, yeah, we don't invest really in prevention, that's not what we do. So a group of investors got together and created an impact investing fund. They pulled together the best practice initiatives and funded those social service agencies for exactly the amount of money they need. And then they said to government, if we can reduce that rate from 80% to 50%, you pay us X. If we only do it by 60%, Y. 50% Z, and so on. And so they were able to negotiate that they, government, wouldn't have to absorb any risk. Our governments are not the best at risk, but the investors naturally do this kind of thing. And if we actually got to the point where we closed a prison and there were significant savings, that would be shared with the investors. So many pros and cons in this, and you can see a lot of people going, are you freaking kidding me? Like, we've got these investors making money off this stuff, it's crazy. And other people saying, government only pays on outcomes and only pays a portion of the cost, makes tons of sense to me. It's been challenging to negotiate a social impact bond in Canada. We actually have one out of Saskatchewan, came from nowhere. Small investor, small organization looking around the social housing project for single moms. They're launched a social impact bond about 3 years ago now, and we're waiting for the results. We're working on one with Heart and Stroke Foundation around hypertension reduction, so we'll see what happens. But the Peterborough Prison one, what happened is, as a result of their work, policy was changed. So we never actually got to see the result of the SIB because the policies they were working for came into effect. Is that a success or a failure? Who knows? It's a very interesting space.
So what about these large pension funds, right? They're massive in assets. So have they decided what proportion of their investments are going to be for these type of social impact activities?
Yeah.
I see.
Okay.
Okay.
You would think, right? Because, I mean, come on, it's our pension. But they're totally, again, kind of very cautious about, listen, it's our pension money, I get it. But they're at the table. They're at the table. They're watching this very cautiously. They are not going to be early adopters. My diffusion of innovation cycle, they're way down. They're way down a little bit, but they're at the table, and that is something. And so it is really good. And of course, data. So there's huge movements to understanding the data we have. Is there opportunities to think differently about how we use that to make a real difference? I'll just tell you one program we have is the Green Button campaign, where you are able to give up your energy data that is anonymized and made available to entrepreneurs to develop energy-saving products and services. what's the use of that data sitting in some vaulted hydro when it can be used for that kind of process? So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Blue Button campaign in your space and health is currently under development. The value of demonstrating impact is critical. You may know the path-based education program, which was able to do a social return on investment analysis to show every dollar invested in pathways resulted in a $24 savings in the system. So this was kids getting jobs, completing education, deferring pregnancy, staying out of the criminal justice system, et cetera, et cetera. And these kind of rates were able to be the kind of evidence they needed to secure more financing from government and spread. One of the challenges, though, is the government said, okay, we would love this program in Indigenous populations. One of the challenges is if you look at Regent Park, new immigrants very focused on education want their kids to succeed, why they came to Canada in some cases, and an Indigenous population in the history with education, very different. So these things can't be just, it's not a Tim Hortons franchise. You can't pick it up in one community, throw it in and out. It really needs to be owned by the community and it needs to be customized. Those huge lessons from trying to scale this process. Failure reports are a huge trend. And, adverse events in hospitals have, I think, really paved the way for a lot of this stuff. But there's still lots of people who are very scared. And it's not about even admitting your failure as much as about admitting the learning that you got from it and showing that you actually have made a difference. And so you're going to see more and more of these, I think. But ultimately, all of this stuff and what I'm hoping you will bring to any kind of problem that you see now is your new eyes. This is a group called, oh my goodness, what's it called? Just the name just escaped me. Anyway, they're a riders group in Africa, and they are a bunch of motorcycle enthusiasts. And they went into Africa and they found that there was a ton of ambulances and other devices left by the sides of the road. They were not able to get into the most remote communities. The vehicles were not maintained, and it was a huge problem. And so because they automatically thought about motorcycles as an option, they were able to get into the Riders for Health. They were able to get into the most isolated communities. They taught people how to maintain motorcycles, and the impact has been absolutely phenomenal on healthcare. And who would have thunk? People with different eyes would have thunk, right? And it's about creating opportunities for those different people to come together. So we know that education alone is not sufficient to change behavior, that really you have to do things like make it visual, you have to personalize it, and of course, ultimately, you need to interact with the people whose behavior you want to change. You've seen these guys, you know that what they know is that I'm just going to put some money in my little guitar case and people will say, oh yeah, you're supposed to put money in there. What they don't necessarily know is that how they would get even more money is that I was someone that you valued in your peer group and I walked by and you actually saw me putting money in there, you're more likely to put money in there. And so how do we understand this kind of modeling and the social norms to make the change that we want? Air miles is obviously one of them, but there's other kind of approaches as well. And finally, there's such an influence on language. If you guys notice, like in the news, they don't talk about committing suicide anymore. They talk about death by suicide, right? And the people in the community say, criminals commit crimes, suicide is not a crime, so stop saying committed suicide, say died by suicide instead, and it's really getting picked up. In the injury prevention world, they're really trying to get rid of the word accidents, because people think, well, you have no control over an accident, just happens. Talk about crashes. Stop using it. So there is a real value in the language that we're using. And I just want to wrap up by talking a little bit about Canada and our leadership role in social innovation. It may be new language, but it is how we see ourselves as Canadians. Peacekeeping, Medicare, Women's Institute, Greenpeace started here, the first environmental movement of its kind. This is who we are. This is how we see ourselves. It is part of our Canadian identity. Although the language may be new, the concepts are not, is what we do. And in 2007, when I started at MaRS and you Googled social innovation, flatline, right? There was nothing happening. And now it is really taking off. And in fact, if you Google social innovation, the number one country that comes up is Singapore. Someone one day will explain to me how guided democracy is always a leader in innovation. I don't really get it. But Canada is right there as number 2. Toronto is the first city that pops up. So we are doing a lot in this space. We have a real opportunity to put our Canadian imprint on this space and to hold on to it. And we have had success. I know in reading newspapers and listening to the news, it is so easy to be discouraged. But think about the women's movement, anti-smoking, recycling, gay marriage. These are incredible recent successes. We can do this. We have the ability to make these phenomenal changes. My friend Brenda Zimmerman always left with this quote, "Let's get to it. Time is too short and things are too bad for pessimism." Thank you so much. This is my contact information.